All right, it's about time for us to get started. Cliff, good to see you back. Before we get started with class, that's way too much. Before we get started with class, take just a minute and talk about small groups. You've seen on the bulletin, save the date for February 20th. Well, I can officially tell you tonight what we're going to do. That is a combined small group meeting on February the 20th. It's right after church, and it will be at the Opera House in Humboldt. Lunch will be provided, and I guess the theme is we're going to have the small groups Winter Olympics. So come to participate or come to watch. Either way, I promise you it'll be fun. Anyway, it should be a lot of fun. Hopefully we'll have a lot of enjoyment there. But anyway, that's February 20th. It's right after church, and I did ask the elders if it would be okay we dress down just a little bit next Sunday. Wear a little bit more comfortable clothing since we're going straight there, and there is going to be a little bit of activity for some people. So keep that in mind. Might want to wear your tennis shoes. What's that? No costumes, no spandex, no. I don't know. I know they, Suzanne Chapman got us a really good deal on the building. We're using the tables and chairs and everything. Anyway, come, don't bring anything for lunch. Everything's provided. It'll be a big time one way or another. Whether it's a hit or it's not, I promise it'll be enjoyable to see. All right, tonight's spiritual gift we're going to talk about is giving. And before I get started, I'm going to tell just a quick story. There's a gentleman that I've worked with on and off for the past 25 years. And in talking to him, you can tell he's got some pretty good Bible knowledge. But to be honest, he's rough as a cop. So I finally got the opportunity to ask him about it. I said, man, what's the deal? You've got some knowledge. And he started laughing. And he said, Kevin, I'll tell you. I said, all right, tell me. He said, growing up, he said, my daddy was a traveling preacher. He said he drug our family all around the South. We preached at every little church, every tent meeting that we could preach at. And he said, my brother and I would pass the hat when he got done preaching. And so we'd hand the hat to Daddy on the stage. Daddy would count the money. And if it wasn't enough, we'd pass the hat again. And he said this kept going on. And he said he'd finally get back up and he'd start preaching again. And he'd start preaching about you got to give till it hurts. And he said it literally was people would have to pay to get out of there for him to sit down. And I know that's a true story. And I know this guy hadn't been back to church. He ain't been to church in 30 years. He got no desire whatsoever. But anyway, I thought if we're on giving, I thought that was a pretty good story to tell. Pretty interesting. Some of y'all probably remember those traveling preachers. Kind of showing my age just a little bit. But anyway, I thought that was an interesting story. Now, we've all heard those sermons about giving, some of them hardcore, and I definitely think they have a place, and I definitely think they're needed. That's not what you're going to get tonight, by any means. So we're going to start, hopefully tonight when we get finished, you're going to feel good about giving. We're going to start in the Old Testament, kind of work our way forward. The giving in the Old Testament, it was way different than what we're required to do in the New Testament, right? Yes, no? All right, let me ask another way. What's the first thing you think about when you think about giving in the Old Testament? Tithing, thank you. And tithing was how much? 10%. The first time that the 10% is mentioned in the Bible is in Genesis chapter 14. And this is a story where Abram rescues Lot and his family from the 4 kings that have attacked Sodom and taken them off as captives. And I'm going to read just a part of that. Genesis 14, beginning to verse 18. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High. And he blessed Abram, saying, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Then Abram gave him 1/10 of everything, all the plunder that he had taken. Genesis chapter 28, beginning to verse 20 through 22. And this is a story where Jacob has a dream of the stairway to heaven. Then Jacob makes a vow, saying, If God will be with me and keep me in this way that I'm going, and give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I come back to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I have set as a pillar shall be God's house. And all of that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you. All right, now question. Why did I pick these two early examples? Anything interesting about those?
The law of Moses wasn't in effect.
Yes, sir, that's correct. This is prior to the law of Moses, which I thought was very interesting. We know when Moses comes around, in the law, tithing was required. Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 22 says, you shall surely tithe all the produce from what you sow, which comes from the field every year. Also Leviticus chapter 27, verse 30. A tithe of everything from the land, whether grain from the soil or fruit from the trees, belongs to the Lord. It is holy to the Lord. All right, so under the old law, what was the purpose of tithing?
A lot of it went to support the priests and Levites
Support the Levites, why?
because they didn't have a part.
That's right, because they didn't have part of the inheritance. That was theirs. All right, what else? What other reasons? Several reasons.
Keep up the temple, and keep up the tabernacle.
Yes, sir. All right, what else? I've got a couple other things. They provided for the poor and the widows out of the tithe. Also, the tithe for everyone to give, it was a reminder that everything belonged to God, and that portion that they gave back was a reminder to them that God had given them everything, and that was the main purpose for the tithe for the people. All right, so we know tithing under the old law was required. So my question is, was tithing really giving? Was tithing really giving? It was required. Was it?
As opposed to being a tax.
Yes, sir. That's my question. Because that's what I've got written down. It's basically a tax for God's people. So was tithing really giving? Either too deep or nobody's going to talk.
Would not be giving, I mean, in the sense that we give today. We give
That's right.
to the church, whoa. All right. So we give to the church to do God's work, to support the church here, the congregation, and other ministries outside the walls of this building. They were tithing or giving in the same sense to support God's work, taking care of, taking care of all those that were just mentioned. So I think there's some it's different, but yeah, it's some similarities there.
Yeah, we're kind of going that way. Yes, I put down yes and no. No, because it was a tax, but yes, because the same reason David gave. There were also other ways of giving in the Old Testament other than the tithe. You had the alms, you had the free will giving, free will offering, excuse me. That's more of what we think about today in giving. So you did have the opportunity to give from your heart in the Old Testament as well as giving the 10%.
Thing concerning that is rather interesting, involving the 10% tithe, because that was obligation.
Yes, sir.
It was not, it was obligation and not because, that when you're obligated to do something, and I feel that way about it. If I give a gift or I get a gift, if it's because I have to or because someone felt obligated to do it, it's not truly a gift in my thinking.
That's right. And that's what I was trying to look at, the difference between the tithing. To be honest, I kind of got caught up in the tithing and the free will offerings and the alms. That's something I'd never studied before. Never really had a reason to specifically study those. It's pretty interesting how the structure was set up. Anyway, we're not under the old law, so let's move on. Same question. Under the New Testament Christians, are we required to give?
There was nothing stated about an amount.
I didn't say amount. I said, are we required to
Nothing
give?
stated about amount. It's kind of interesting. We always go to Corinthians to talk about what Paul told them. Then
Yes,
it's
sir.
kind of interesting to me that he told them that after the church had been in existence for over 20 years, and why they didn't know if it was a requirement. So giving we can see from the book of Acts and so forth, they were giving all along. He established a method of giving and that kind of thing. But there's nothing that I can think of that talks about amounts or whatever. The Bereans, you know, some of them had to, basically God asked for your heart. You put your heart in
Right.
the thing, and
Yeah,
then you give.
and I may ask the question incorrectly. I
Here,
don't
I'll
know
let
about
him.
an amount. I said, are we required to give? Bob? Butch, I'd be happy for you to talk. It's been a long time since I heard you.
Why is it we always have to put a monetary value with giving? Is our time, our life, our offering our home, our car, our vehicle, is that not a tithing also?
Yes.
Does it always have to be a monetary value?
No, it does not. And yeah, you're getting ahead of me, but you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. All right, I've got a couple verses here we're going to read. Matthew chapter 6, beginning verse 2. I'm going to read these. It says, Jesus says, when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites in the synagogue and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly I tell you, they receive their full reward. Jesus says when you give, not if you give. Luke chapter 6, verse 30. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Give to who? Everyone. 1 Corinthians 16, that's what we're just talking about, verses 1 and 2. Now concerning the collection of the saints, as I directed the churches in Galatia, so do I you also, on the first day of every week. Each one of you is to put aside and save as he may prosper, so that no collections be made when I come. Paul directs the churches to give on the first day of the week. So I ask my question again. Are we required, or are we told to give? I think we are. I mean, it's not just stated you give 10% like it was in the Old Testament, but I think it's pretty clear that we're required to give as a Christian. Anybody want to argue that? Okay. All right, well, we'll move on then. Now that we've established that giving is required, let's talk about how we should give. We should give first and foremost, we should give for the right reasons. So what is the right reason to give? Y'all notice I asked a lot of questions, so there's a reason for that. What's the right reason to give? Love? Bible tells us a reason.
To meet a need.
To meet a need? Okay. Yes, sir.
Same reason we talked about the Old Testament, they'll remind us everything we have got God.
Yes, sir. That's exactly right. All right, let's we'll stay in Matthew 6. I'm going to read verses 1 and 2 this time. Beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by men. I tell you truly that they have received their full reward. So we're to give not to be righteous in front of men, but to be righteous to God. Okay? What are some examples or some reasons that we should want to give for the right reason? I'll throw one out there to get us started. Maybe I'm not doing a good job asking questions. James came up with one Sunday in class. He talked about Ananias and Sapphira in Acts chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. They gave for the wrong reason. What happened to them? They were struck down. Luke chapter 18, verses 9 through 19. This is the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector praying. Not talking money, but it's the same principle. The tax collector was justified to God by his giving, where the Pharisee was not. He was justified to himself and to other people. So the reason to give, or the right reason to give, is our relationship with God. Our righteousness, it goes to our righteousness toward God. I got another one. This is, how about Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 45? And I am going to read a little bit of this. Starting verse 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right hand and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. Now I'm skipping. Then he will say to those on the left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothing, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me. Truly I tell you, then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. So what's the reason we want to give correctly? We don't want to be a goat, right? We want to be righteous, okay? We want to be righteous, and that's, yes, sir.
I've been working on a lesson in relation to those verses, as a matter of fact,
Okay.
because I've had a number of people that want to, the society gets in moods of certain questions become popular as to why God does things certain ways and so forth. And the question of why doesn't God fix things now? Why did the Lord not just take care of this and so forth? And those verses that you've got there, it talks about that. He said he's put the mechanism in place. That's our job. He's given that job to us, and if we either do it or we fail, and then we got to answer to the Lord as to what we have or have not accomplished and why that's the case. And so these people that ask, why doesn't the Lord fix it now? He's done something for that. The job is he put you here, and you have an ability to do your part. You're either doing it or you're not.
Yes, sir, that's correct. All right, staying in Matthew chapter 6, continuing on in verse 3 through 6. It says, but when you give to the needy, then let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for the love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their full reward. All right, again, we hear the same thing. How are we supposed to give? We're supposed to give secretly, right? We're not supposed to do it in grand fashion where people can see it. Giving is an intimate act between the giver and God. It's a practice that should be done privately and secretly. Side note, when I was a lot younger at another congregation, the men that waited on the table, after we took up the collection, we took it back to the office and we counted the money. And I'll be honest, I hated that. It wasn't any of my business, number one. Number two, it hurt my feelings to see what some people give. And I didn't want to see it, but I saw it. And it hurt it both that some gave more than I thought and some gave less than I thought. So, and I was young. But anyway, I just remember that. That was something that bothered me. I didn't like being a part of that. We're supposed to give in secret. It's between you and God what you give. Next, we're going to move on. We're supposed to give purposefully. I'm going to be in 2 Corinthians chapter 9. And in the first part of verse 7, Paul says, each of you should give what you have decided in your heart. Paul also says the same thing in 1 Corinthians 16, verse 1. He states the same thing, and he also says that he said that same thing to the Galatian churches. So what does it mean that each of you should give as you have decided in your heart? What does it mean? What does this verse mean? Verse 7, that you should give as you have decided in your heart. All right, here's what I've got. It says you have made up your mind on what you will give. It means planning ahead, deliberately thinking through what you're going to give before you give it. Okay, that's what I get out of it. Anybody agree, disagree? I found this quote, thought was pretty interesting. It says, giving purposefully guards the giver in being robbed of the joy of giving. Anything less or grudgingly, forced or last minute dampens the state of cheerfulness. I thought that you think about it, it's a pretty good quote. How many of you do a monthly budget? We do. We always have. My wife and my closest friends will tell you I'm cheap. I'll tell you I'm frugal, but that's beside the point. I can remember in those early years of marriage, making that budget and putting your contribution there was tough. To the point we had to have some discussions. Back then, there was too much month at the end of the money. And you've got to plan for it. You can't come in Sunday morning and throw it in. You've got to plan for it.
But isn't that the point, Kevin? Isn't it the point that that our giving is not supposed to be an afterthought.
Yes, sir.
That we need to understand that all of these things that we've gotten used to aren't helping us get to heaven, and they're not helping anybody else get to heaven. You know, to go back just for a minute, I think one of the reasons that God wants us to do things more secretly instead of, of course he was talking at the time about the Pharisees going through the streets and bringing upon themselves how good they were. I put myself in the person's shoes that needs the help. If someone is standing me up in front of the congregation and saying, oh, look, Jason is in such bad shape because of all these horrible decisions he's made, so I have helped him.
Yep.
That's not going to bring me any closer to God.
No, and it's sure not.
There's so much practical reason behind so much of this stuff. And on the other hand, if we're struggling and you and Lisa come to us and say, hey, let us help you out, that's gonna mean more to me that you do it privately, and I'm gonna see you're not getting anything out of it, gratitude-wise from other people.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think we have to plan ahead, because God doesn't want the leftovers. He wants the first
I've heard you say it
things,
before. Yeah, that's good.
and God will take care of the things that we need. We may not have the $400,000 house or the $80,000 car, but he's going to make sure we're taken care of if we're taking care of what we need to first.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. On that same point of giving purposefully, I'll leave you just with a couple of questions to think about. We're not going to talk about them, but when you're out of town, do you make up your contribution on Sunday? Do you give a contribution where you're visiting? I know that's a whole other discussion, but just a couple of things to think about. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I was going to go back to the idea of the fact that verse talks about our heart. I think sometimes we read that and we kind of gloss over because it sounds like a sort of a poetic phrase maybe.
Yep.
And yeah, I think that really goes back to why we're supposed to guard our heart and the importance of our heart and how we consume everything, because that's our act of giving comes from that place.
So I think this verse is pretty straightforward. It tells us how to give, but it doesn't give us a percentage like the old law did. So it gives some flexibility to us. It puts it back on us instead of God telling us what we should do, which I think is more difficult than God just telling us what to do. But 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 11 and 12, Paul says, now finish the work so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it according to your means. For if the willingness is there, the gift is acceptable according to the one who has, to what one has, not according to what one does not have. Excuse me, I got tongue-tied. What is different about verse 12? What's Paul saying here? We've just talked about that our giving. What's verse 12? I'll read it again. For if the willingness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not have.
I use that a bit in a lesson too, because people have a tendency to say, well, if I had this, that, or the other.
Right?
If I had this, that, or the other, I could do so many wonderful things. But that verse tells me that it's not a matter of what you're going to do with something you don't have. It's a matter of what you do with that you do have.
That's exactly right. What I get from that, along with what Cliff just said, is that tells me everybody should give. It doesn't matter how little you have. Everybody should give something. Not necessarily talking monetary, but we're talking about giving. Moving on. We are to give. We are encouraged to give generously. If somebody would read 2 Corinthians 9, verses 6 through 11 for me.
Remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. For each man should give what he has decided in his heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that in all things, at all times, having all you need, you will abound in every good work. As it is written, He has scattered abroad His gifts to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. Now He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. You will be made rich in every way, so that you can be generous on every occasion, and through us your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God.
All right, I'm going to read Luke chapter 6, verse 38. Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will also be measured back to you. All right, these two verses, several verses, these two, who uses these verses for the wrong reason all the time? That's the first thing popped in my head when I started reading. You got it. Tell the evangelist. That's right. That's what I put down. But you're right. That's an even better way to say it. They tell you all the time, for $100, I'll pray for you, and the more you send, the more you're going to have. Is that right? Maybe that's not as prevalent as it was when I was growing up, but that was one of the 13 channels you could get on Sunday morning. Anyway, showing my age. These verses tell us to be, truthfully, do tell us to be generous. Tell us not to hold back. But what'd you call it? Health and wealth gospel. These guys tell you that the more you give, the more you'll get. That's not what these verses say, is it? Or is it?
I think it's saying you cannot outgive God.
That's right. All right. I like that. Anything else? I think the verses are literal to an extent. But when it says,
I think the thing one of the things with giving is it's really a measure of how much you trust, how much you trust God. Because the giving was a tenth, but it was the first tenth.
that's right. That's a
and
good
you
point.
gave, so you didn't get all your 100% in, and then you count out 10 and you give it to him. What you did was you gave him the first 10. You gave him the first, you gave him the best, and then you trusted him that he would take care of you the rest of the time. And so giving is always, I'm going to tell on myself a little bit, but I've struggled with giving because from a very young age, taking care of me was my job. And so if I didn't take care of myself, there wasn't anybody to do it. And so trusting that it's going to be there is a struggle, honestly, for me.
I get that.
And so giving is something I have to really, really work at, because it's like, if I give this, is there, like you said, is there more month left at the end of the money? If I do this, is there going to be money left?
Right.
And so that's something I have to really, really push myself. And that's the reason why I think it's good to talk about it. And that's the reason why when you said you were going to choose this discipline, I was happy about that.
Ooh, I hope I don't disappoint you.
No, you're doing good. But you know, trusting God is something we say very flippantly. We say it, you know, oh, just trust God.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
And to that point, when I said I think these verses are somewhat literal, I do believe that the more you give, I do believe the more you'll receive, but it's not necessarily monetary. That's not the point here. I know that's what the health and wealth use, but that's not the point.
Are you going to talk about Malachi? Is that one of your things?
Not in the lesson, but go ahead. Yes, sir.
Okay, well, Malachi 3, it says, but you ask, I say, return to me, and I'll return to you, says the Lord Almighty. But you ask, how are we to return? Will a man rob God? Yet you rob me. But you ask, how do we rob you? In tithes and offerings, you are under a curse, the whole nation of you, because you are robbing me. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. Then there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that you will not have room enough for it. So anyway, that's part of what you're talking about.
That's the next thing I have written down. If we truly believe these verses, we shouldn't put God to the test, but maybe we should step out and give more than we think we can, and just see what happens. Cliff?
This is a little abstract application, but it answers a lot of the questions. When the woman came in with the alabaster box and anointed Jesus, and Simon was upset, that money, and if he knew what kind of a person touched him and so forth, why he would have been, he wouldn't have allowed that and so forth. And he got into the business of talking about the debtors, the money lender had debtors, and one owed 500 denarii and the other 50. And when they could not pay, he canceled the debt and said, which one loved him the most? And he said, of course, it was the one who had been forgiven the most. And so the application here is, if the depth of appreciation for what he has done, the forgiveness of our sins, the love he has bestowed upon us, may be a reflection, may be reflected in what we give back, the amount of love that we show in return for that.
I've kind of skipped around in my lesson because I know I'm running out of time, and so there's some points I had that I'm not going to hit. One of them, James, just to let you know, I was paying attention Sunday morning. I was going to talk about it's more blessed to give than receive. I did hear that, and I actually do have it, but I'm going to skip through that so we can get through. To this point, and again, I told you I kind of got interested in the tithing. Is the giving in the Old Testament and the giving in the New Testament that much different? Giving in the Old Testament and giving in the New Testament that much different? Here's what I mean. If you put the tithing together with the free will offerings, the alms, versus our support for church and helping others, is there a whole lot of difference? The structure's pretty similar, which I really kind of blew my mind. I always thought the Old Testament's 10% and that's what you did. Sir?
I don't see them the same.
All right, tell me.
I see the one was written in commandment, the other one is written in our hearts. It's written because, we have to figure that thing out, what we're willing to do, and the one says a specific amount, the other doesn't lay it out like that. It talks about for you to make a decision, and to me, I see quite a bit of difference there.
Difference in that, yes. What I'm saying is that the structure is the same about, they gave their tithe to help the Levites, to help the temple. We give our money to help sustain the church here. The free will tithes were used to help the poor and those that needy, and we do the same here, is what I was making. I think the structure is similar, not the actual written how it happens. Because you're right, they were under a percentage, this is what you do, and now it's put on our hearts to decide how much to do. Let's move on. All right, the last example I'm going to give, and again, I kind of skipped some here. We're to give, and I think this is the biggest place where the Old Testament and New Testament splits to me, and that's kind of what I was leading up to. We're told to give sacrificially. Okay, Mark chapter 12, verses 41 through 44. If someone would read that for me, I'd appreciate it. It's the widow's offering. For 12:41 through 44.
And he sat down opposite the treasury and watched the people putting money into the offering box. Many rich people put in large sums, and a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which make a penny. And he called his disciples to him and said to them, "Truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in everything she had, all she had to live on."
Okay, so what's the difference in the two? And to me, the rich made a contribution. The poor widow made a commitment. There's a difference. It appears that the rich gave, it didn't hurt them, it didn't affect them. Where it does with the widow, she didn't hold anything back. She gave everything she had to survive on. She knew that God would ultimately take care of her needs, and her giving showed she trusted God completely. She gave sacrificially. She sacrificed everything she had monetarily. Another example, how about Abraham and Isaac? Is that sacrificial giving? I mean, you've got Abraham who is about to sacrifice his promised son that God promised was going to be this huge people. He was willing to do that. That's sacrificial giving. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 16 says, "Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God." Our final example I'm going to use here, it comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 9. Paul says, "For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich." Our giving, here Paul is telling, he's using Christ as the example of giving. He's talking to the Macedonians, how they've given. Christ's self-giving for us is now the standard. We have Christ. They didn't have Christ in the Old Testament. Cliff, I think that's the difference you were trying to say between them, and I agree with what you're saying. Not only did Christ give up his life, but he also gave up heaven to come to earth for us. You can't give up much more than that. That's a sacrifice. So, if it's an example we live under, we're supposed to be like Christ, and he is our example. So do we give like Christ? 1 Peter 2, verses 21. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you might follow in his footsteps. 1 Corinthians 11:1. Paul says, "Be imitators of me as I am of Christ." We know, as followers of Christ, that he is our example. Does this include his example of giving? Because what did Christ give? He gave it all. Now, we've talked about money mainly tonight, but I hope, and Bob brought it up and some others, I hope everybody understands, I'm not just talking about monetary. We're talking about giving is much, much more than just monetary. Giving should be financial, it should be emotional, and it definitely should be spiritual. And studying through this, I've decided that giving absolutely should be one of the most powerful spiritual gifts that we have. When it's done properly, I'm going to read this because I thought it was pretty good and I wrote it down. When done properly, it strengthens the giver, it sustains the receiver, and sets an amazing example to those outside of Christ. Giving is important. I'm going to leave you with this last. Now, what other examples other than giving of your money?
Marriage, spouses to each other.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. I'm glad Lisa's not here. Yeah. I wrote one down. When I was younger, there were a couple widow ladies at church. I mowed their yards for them. I raked their leaves in the fall. I gave that because I didn't have any money, so that was a way for me to give. But now, it's a whole lot easier for me to write a check, and I hadn't raked a yard in a long time. I'm missing something, I think, because of that. So giving is not just monetary. And I think if monetary is the easy part for you now, you need to look at another way to give if you really want to get the rewards from giving. I'm going to leave you with Matthew chapter 6, verses 25 through 34. And it's a subtitle, "Don't Worry," and I'm just going to paraphrase. Jesus says, "Don't worry about anything, not even tomorrow. God will provide. He provides for the birds to eat and the flowers to be clothed. How much more will he take care of his children?" We do not need to store up and worry about tomorrow. Don't worry about giving. We should give. Thank you.